Ukrainian counterattacks recapture parts of Vovchansk, while the Russians gain additional grounds in other parts of the front line. At the same time, new air defense systems are being promised or arriving in Ukraine, but we'll talk about this and about what else is happening in the war in Ukraine in this situation report. Hello and welcome. The Russians have we'll start off with the front line in the north, and here the Russians have small successes inside of Vovchansk that we can see here. The Russians gained additional ground. This is Petrenko, the Ukrainian mill blogger, basically saying that the Russians gained this part here, here. And this is now under their control as well, as we can see on the map. So this part is here. And this part is here. This is a Ukrainian mill blogger who is fairly accurate with his assessment. So I take admission of defeat from him as most likely true. Next to visual evidence. Visual evidence, on the other hand, is there from other parts of the front line. The German journalist Julian Röpke has identified a auxiliary bridge, a military auxiliary bridge that was laying over the Vovchansk over the Vovcha here in the east, and that allowed the Ukrainians to counterattack in the eastern part of Vovchansk, and here they reached almost the northern part. So they have, according to him, almost reached this here. This part supposedly should be back under Ukrainian control. So some quite significant tactical successes, which obviously do not change anything in the overall situation as of now, but still a significant success for the Ukrainians here in a tactical sense in Vovchansk. But that's it from the northern front. I cannot see any other changes, so the fighting seems to be mostly concentrated on the city of Vovchansk, where both sides try to gain the upper hand while the fighting is continuing. On the eastern front, we have some smaller changes. One smaller change here at Novoselivke. I have a geolocalization that the Russians have reached this point here, and we can see the hedges, the tree lines, so they are up at this point. So in total, an advance along the tree line here of roughly 1 kilometer. Here the Russians have advanced somewhat to the west. But that's it north of the Seversky Donetsk. We switch over to the south, and here we have a small Russian success close to Soledar. Here the Russians managed to advance in the direction of Rostolivka, roughly 150 meters along the railroad line here. I have the geolocalization, and the Russians have reached this point. Now if we look on the map, this is more or less here. That's not too impressive. That's not opening a new front like I've seen with some Russian mill bloggers. That's just them in one of their countless attacks gaining a few additional meters, which they have. No denying that, but a small success here. That's all that I can see here for now. I do not see any changes in Chasiv Yar around that, so we switch directly south towards Avdiivka, and here the Russians had a painful success. They managed to enter Novo-Oleksandrivka, which is northwest of Ocheretine. They were lastly roughly here. So they should have gained this tree line here and the most eastern houses of Novo-Oleksandrivka. This is important, obviously, as the Russians will aim to reach this road here, which is the main north-south connection, the main line of communication along the front line here. As you can see easily, this allows the Ukrainians to redeploy north-south. Should the Russians be able to cut it, it would be really painful for the Ukrainians. So any advance in this direction is not good. That's really not great yet. Still no breakthrough or anything like this, but an advance that will still be unpleasant, really unpleasant for the Ukrainians. Further south, in the area of Marinka, we have a number of changes in the area south of it. By the way, I still do not have any significant changes in Krasnohorivka. The front line there seems to be mostly stabilized after the Russians gained a few houses in this area here. Now we have geolocalization of pictures that images where the Russians have advanced. They have reached this point. which is this here. So before, Pobjeda was more or less the front line. Now they gained these 3 lines here. They have it fully under their control as well. To the south, they reached the river here in Paraskovivka. So they managed to advance roughly 500 meters to the west in Paraskovivka. Here, they were the geolocalization is here, and we have them advancing south of it, getting close to Konstantinivka here as well. Again, they were here, now they are here. We see that here roughly already as the gray zone in this map, so they were advancing here. Here they seem to have been defeated, so they should not have a permanent presence there, but again, like we said in the past, this is not always absolutely certain, but we know that they managed to advance at least until here before they were defeated. To the south, they also gained additional ground. Here we have another visual evidence of them reaching up to here. Another unpleasant advance. You can see here that's the connection between Konstantinivka and Vuhledar, another important line of communication, and the Russians managed to advance along this here. And if I'm not completely wrong, it should be bigger than we see on the map here. We see that small tree line and the big one here with that up there, and that's this up here. That's the small tree line. So they should be more or less between the 2 lakes, so roughly until here. So significantly further to the west than we've seen than we see so far on the map here. The distance towards the road is shrinking, probably, what is that, 3 kilometers now, so it's getting more unpleasant in this area as well. Then we have another change in the area south of Velika Novosilka. Here, the Russians managed to advance somewhat in Uroshaine, barely to speak of. We see Russian activity, so they have more or less reached this point. As you can see, those are the 2 buildings here, and they are directly southeast of it, so more or less here they have advanced to this point. That the pressure on Uroshaine will continue is obvious, as the Russians now have control over the western flank of it, with them controlling 2/3 of Staromayorsk. The clock is ticking for Uroshaine, but as of now, at least, the Ukrainians can still hold in there. That was it with any change in territory. I have nothing new about Orikhiv. I have nothing new from the Dnipro, and I have nothing new from the Crimean Peninsula that is of any importance to talk about. So we'll switch directly over to additional informations that we have today. We are somewhat smaller. The situation report will be somewhat shorter. We'll start with this video here. Kriegsforscher, a Ukrainian soldier, has first published a video of the 2S-43 being in use in Russia on the northern front line. Now a video has appeared of it shooting here. Now the 2S-43 Malva is an interesting system. It was introduced in the Russian armed forces 1 year ago, so it's a really new artillery piece. The piece itself, the artillery tube, is the same as the Mr. S. So the range is at most something like 30 kilometers. They won't be able to compete. It's not competitive with Western artillery in terms of range. Where it is important, though, for the Russians is that it's their first wheeled artillery that they have in their contemporary armed forces. Wheeled artillery, obviously far faster. It can be redeployed far more easily as it rides like a truck. It is cheaper to produce and it's cheaper to maintain. It's easier to maintain. So while it might not have the same off-road capability, at the same time they can produce it easier, faster, and they can easier maintain it, which will help the Russians. So far I have not seen one of them being destroyed. They only seem to have been identified in the north, but now we see them in action. Troop generation Ukraine, we have some news. The Ukrainians have now said that as a Ukrainian citizen who has left Ukraine for more than 3 months, so far they were seemingly exempt from the conscription. So if you lived abroad and came to visit, you were allowed out again. If you were a permanent resident outside, now this is no longer valid. So my understanding is if you live for 5 years outside and come visit Ukraine, you might no longer be allowed to leave, as you have to register for the conscription. This is one of the changes that Ukraine does to gain additional personnel. In political area, we also have news from Ukraine. They are increasing the status of English to make the country more attractive for tourism and investment. Obviously, that's not really aimed at wartime, but there you see how the Ukrainians look westwards, look towards the European Union, and want to change their country into a way that tourism and investment from the West is far more attractive for the future. Again, this is not something that they might seriously consider now in the war, but the part of the regulation will be that you won't be hired by the government in certain jobs if you can't prove to speak English at a certain level. This will obviously make it much easier if you want to start a company there and don't speak Ukrainian, don't speak Russian. If the local offices then know English, then that's no longer stopping you from doing so. So I guess a smart move in looking towards the future, and an optimistic look into the future from Ukraine. Then we have international aid. First pictures have now appeared of the cheetah. Now the cheetah is the English translation for the German Gepard, which is the German self-propelled artillery, self-propelled anti-air tank or self-propelled anti-air that the Ukrainians are using now for 1.5 years. The difference is this is a German one as well, but it was built for the Dutch, and the Dutch used a different surveillance radar, as you can see here, whereas the German one has for its surveillance radar a mattress type. This one has only this, let's call it a tube, looking like a tube. So they are easy to differentiate, and those must be some that were bought from Jordan and then have been refurbished so they can be sent to Ukraine. And now we see them having arrived in Ukraine, so the number of Gepard or cheetahs, SPAAs, is increasing. At the same time, the Dutch have finished a 4-month training for Ukrainian Marines, 300 of them. They are now being sent back to Ukraine, and there obviously it was different training than just basic training. They learned amphibious assaults, things like that, probably for the Dnipro operation for future ones, and they are being sent back. And Italy has said they're going to send another SAMPT air defense system, another system that's badly needed by the Ukrainians and will now be available in the near future. But that was already it from me for now, because we don't have much more that has happened over the last 2 days, as we had a longer situation report on Monday. So let's finish it here, somewhat shorter than usual today. If you like this report, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon, and leave a comment. Leave a comment what you think about the Ukrainian counterattacks in the north. Do you think they make sense, or is it a distraction for them, for the Ukrainians? And if you want to support the channel, because this channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you, then you see the means for that in the description. Thank you very much for everyone already supporting, but that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.